What if the most powerful empire in history wasn't conquered by a king, but by a corporation? Not a nation, not a government, a private company with shareholders, a board of directors, and one goal: profit. This is the extraordinary true story of how a business became an empire. On June 23, 1757, two armies met on a battlefield at Plassey. On one side, an imperial force numbering 50,000. On the other side, roughly 3,000 men. The smaller force won. The winner was a private for-profit corporation. They had shareholders, a board of directors, and a corporate charter. Formed in 1600, their business model was simple: a monopoly to buy Asian spices and ship them to London. At the time, they were operating on the shores of the Mughal Empire, one of the richest and most powerful states on earth. The emperors viewed this small group of English merchants as a minor commercial curiosity, completely reliant on their permission to trade. Over the next century, that central imperial authority began breaking apart. The subcontinent fractured into a patchwork of semi-independent regional states, creating a massive political vacuum. The company reacted to this instability by fortifying their coastal warehouses into stone forts. To guard them, they began raising a private security force, recruiting local Indian soldiers, called sepoys, to form their own standing military. A commercial trading firm, surrounded by destabilized rival territories, found itself possessing the most disciplined, well-financed military force in the region. Which brings us back to how those 3,000 corporate troops won the Battle of Plassey. The company's lead commander, a former clerk named Robert Clive, treated the conflict like a hostile corporate takeover. He realized he didn't need to defeat the massive enemy army if he could buy off the right people before the fighting started. Clive secretly negotiated with the enemy's senior commander, Mir Jafar, promising to install him as the new ruler if he held his forces back. The betrayal worked. Mir Jafar was placed on the throne, operating entirely as a puppet for the corporation. The East India Company now had shadow control over Bengal, one of the most economically productive provinces in the empire. Then, in 1765, they secured something far more valuable than a pliable ruler. They extracted a legal grant from the weakened Mughal emperor, allowing the company to collect taxes directly from Bengal citizens. This flowchart illustrates their original business model. Initially, the company shipped vast amounts of British silver into India to purchase exported textiles. Once they held tax rights, the silver shipments vanished. The company used Bengal's tax revenue to buy those exact local goods. The province was suddenly funding its own extraction. They were no longer an import-export business. They had engineered a self-funding extraction machine. This new revenue model allowed the company to scale their operations with ruthless mathematical efficiency. This diagram shows their growth engine. They pumped Bengal's massive tax surplus directly into expanding their private military force. They used that army to force neighboring rulers into corporate protection rackets, where leaders surrendered independence to avoid invasion. This completed the circuit. Allied states paid the company to maintain troops, dumping fresh revenue into the system to fund an even larger army. By the mid-19th century, this loop had compounded so aggressively that the East India Company controlled roughly 2/3 of the Indian subcontinent, backed by a private standing army numbering in the hundreds of thousands. It is a history of military conquest, but driven entirely by the logic of optimizing a corporate supply chain. A sovereign state, at least in theory, has a mandate to maintain the stability and infrastructure of the society it governs. A corporation has one mandate: to maximize returns for its shareholders. Subjecting an entire population to a profit mandate had devastating consequences. The continuous drain of wealth outward to London drove severe economic disruption. Local industries collapsed, and the regions under company control suffered a series of catastrophic famines. The system finally shattered in 1857. The company's own sepoys, driven by accumulated grievances over taxation, land, and religious tensions, erupted into a massive uprising across northern and central India. The British government had to step in with its royal military to suppress the rebellion. Parliament concluded that administering the lives of hundreds of millions of people was too consequential to leave in the hands of a profit-driven board of directors. The British Crown officially stripped the East India Company of its administrative powers, dissolved the corporation, and absorbed its massive private army and territories directly into the British Empire. When those London merchants first secured their charter, they didn't have a master plan to conquer an empire. They built a fort, negotiated an alliance, and took over a taxation system, because each incremental step along the way simply made mathematical business sense. Profit-seeking institutions, given a power vacuum and a lack of meaningful oversight, do not have natural boundaries. They stop expanding only when an external force finally compels them to. The East India Company didn't just change India, it changed the relationship between commerce and power forever, proving that a corporation, under the right conditions, could become as powerful as a nation. History doesn't just tell us what happened, it shows us why it happened. If you enjoyed this documentary, subscribe for more stories about history, wealth, and power. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next documentary.